Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so this was a couple days ago now, but Emily Jashinski from Breaking Points, she's one of the fill-ins at Breaking Points on the right-leaning side. She interviewed Dave Smith on her podcast. I don't follow her very much. I'm not that much of a fan of her. She's never said anything that has been of particular interest to me personally. Dave Smith has more so, because he's one of these pro-Trump podcasters who has led the charge on turning against Trump over war. He was one of the first to do it. He's been articulating a pretty consistent case for it, taking criticism from all sides, from the right, but also from leftists, people like Kulinski, myself, who say, you know, this is something that you got us into, and wanting a little bit more from people like him other than just saying like, yeah, maybe Trump sucks after all. And there's a lot of context to that. There's a lot of reason for that. But that's essentially what he addresses at part of this conversation that they had, specifically getting into it with Kyle Kulinski and Mehdi Hasan about this idea that he voted for Trump and he's one of these guys. And he feels that the left should be softer on people like him because they are saying the right thing. They're going against Trump. They're articulating anti-war arguments. So I want to engage with this point that he's making, considering that I'm one of the people who has been covering this pivot that people have been doing to the right. And while I may be a little bit more good faith than some, I'm also not necessarily of the opinion that we should be uncritical or unskeptical of some of these voices, because I think there's more work to be done in terms of understanding how we got here. And Dave Smith constantly makes that same point about Democrats and their policies leading to Trump in the first place, which I also want to get into a little bit here. So here's Dave Smith talking to Emily Jashinski.
You know, there's this thing where people would say forever that that the MAGA is a cult, or Trump supporters are like a cult-like following. And I also see right now a lot of people, you know, who have been like really calling people out who voted for Donald Trump or something like that. And you know, so I say this again from the position, which I understand is a weak position to argue from, where I'm already admitting that, like, yes, probably it was wrong to vote for Donald Trump. But also, I'll just say some names here, but I've gotten into some public arguments with Kyle Kulinski and Mehdi Hasan and others like that, who, by the way, I'm not trying to fight with either of those guys. I don't agree with them on everything, but we sure do agree on some really important stuff. And but they're going around like constantly going like, hey, you voted for Donald Trump. Well, look at you, Joe Rogan. You're criticizing him now, but what do you think you voted for? And just like everyone who's, and this is just infuriating me. And I publicly went back and forth with Mehdi a little bit, and then we messaged privately a little bit, and like, we're cool and everything. But there's something about this where, like, I said this publicly, and I'll say this again, that, you know, when I remember, I was so anti-war, so hardcore anti-war, and I never voted for anyone. The only presidential candidate I ever voted for was Ron Paul. Like, I have complete clean hands in terms of voting before 2024. And I remember just mourning the death of the anti-war left. Forever. It was like, as soon as George W. Bush left and Obama came in, and the global war on terrorism just escalated and spread to multiple other theaters. Escalated in the theaters they were already in. He surged like tens of thousands of troops to Afghanistan. Took out, you know, Libya, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, like all of this. And they were just gone. And then when the destruction of Gaza started, they kind of all came back. And I was like, great. You know, I never thought for 1 second that this would be the time to start lecturing everybody about how you voted for Joe Biden. And you should have known that Joe Biden was a lifelong Zionist. And Joe Biden was obviously going to do this. And then, like, the people who voted for Joe Biden, who admit that he committed a genocide, are like shaming everybody else for voting for Donald Trump. Like, yo, let's just take a look at what actually happened here. The entire media apparatus that supported Donald Trump and got him his election victory, turned on him over this war. So, hey, anti-war leftist, take the win. You know what I mean? Like, hey, that's awesome. That's awesome that they're not going along with this. You called us all, or you called them all cultists for so long. They're not cultists. They're turning on him over this. Let it happen. Why are you taking this opportunity to go I told you so? Like, if you really care that oh shit, there's innocent people dying and the world's going to be worse off because of this war, then if you look at people like Tim Dillon and Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn and Andrew Schultz and all these people, you go, wow, they're giving more than enough permission to their viewers to go, hey, we can all oppose this thing. You don't have to, just because we voted for this, still be on board with it. Even not all of their audience obviously voted for it, but they're just so it's oh, that's great. Why would you be? I don't know. I find that to be such a crazy take that it's yo, when the destruction of Gaza was going on, I wasn't thinking about lecturing anybody, because it was no, we just need as many people to be good on this as we can possibly get. That's really important. And it's really important that left-wingers are good on war again. And, I just don't see why anyone wouldn't make the simple calculation that that's more important than me, being hey, you shouldn't have voted for this person or something, which again, maybe not. I mean, maybe we'd all be better off if Kamala Harris was in now, or maybe not. We don't really know, but idea. I'm still, even as disgusted as I am with Trump right now, I still look back and go, nah, the Democrats gave everyone more than enough reason to vote against them. It is what it is. We're pinned in a situation where you got to pick one of two options, and the Democrats were pretty awful for a long time.
So the reason I want to address this honestly, even though I know some people are kind of sick of this beat of comedians who are doing this slow motion turn on Trump, but most of them are really, really holding firm to their principles or their ideas about the world that kind of landed them on voting for Trump in the first place. And so that's really what I'm interested in exploring here. And when it comes to Dave Smith, he is at the forefront of this current trend of people finding more ways to criticize Trump. So in the way that he's saying that this group of podcasters communicating to their audience that it's okay to be opposed to this and introducing them to different rhetoric or reasons or points that they might, it is a good thing. And that's why I amplify it from time to time and try to give them the space to make those points, because there are people out there who need to hear it from that perspective. However, I think what doesn't get addressed when it comes to all this is that there's an underlying worldview that Trump used very cynically to get to the point that he's at, but also in many ways is still very much aligned with what Trump is doing. And so I think what concerns, if I may be illuminating a little bit for Dave Smith or anybody who might share his opinion, that people shouldn't be so alarmist about these guys who voted for and supported Trump, spoke favorably about Trump, and should be a little bit more favorable to this idea that they're changing their mind. The reason is because there is an extreme far-right project built into Trump, his administration, and his movement. We know this. And it is fair to say that in the second time around, there was a little bit more of a mainstream element to it, and not the entire coalition was quite as right-leaning as some of the people like Fuentes or other parts of the coalition. And that's natural. That's how politics works. Trump cobbled together a slightly different coalition this time to win than he did the first time. And so that's what Dave Smith points to when he says this is not a cult. People are not behaving the way that you guys said they would, and people are willing to turn on Trump. But when it comes to the base, that is not, we're not seeing that yet. And Trump's ability to continue waging these wars and doing all kinds of crazy things, and as well as talking the way that he talks, despite the fact that he is going directly at an important portion of his own base, none of this really seems to be shaking his support on the whole. And I do think that it can only take so many impacts, so eventually his support will be weakened. We may be in the process of that. But it is way too self-centered of guys like Dave Smith, specifically Dave Smith, to think that because he is changing his mind and voicing this opinion and reaching a large audience, maybe even many people who agree, that means that the Trump base is moving away from him. I don't think that's the case. And even in the case of Fuentes, you see that he is doing this like, oh, I don't support Trump anymore. I'm just going to vote for Democrats. I'm just going to vote for liberals because Trump is not even far right enough for me. But the problem with people saying, Dave Smith, Theo Vaughn, you just got it wrong. You just voted for the wrong guy. Not so much voters, but voices, right? Commentators. And let's keep in mind that the voters are the ones that haven't so much indicated a break from Trump yet. And it may be a good prediction that they're going to, but they haven't quite yet. But the people who have indicated a strong break from Trump are the commentators like Dave Smith. And so to look at a movement that contains people like Nick Fuentes and the far right elements that are still quite operational in this administration. They're still rounding people up. They still have these warehouses that they're building. They're still trying to create warehouses and networks of prisons in different countries that they can send people to, disappear them to, and you don't hear a peep from these right-wingers about that. So they want all of that. And on top of that, continually what Dave Smith does when he's talking about these issues is he says, well, all of this stuff that Democrats have done is so bad that it essentially forced people to vote for Donald Trump. And all I can say to anybody who thinks that way is that, like, you're in a prison in your mind. Because I'm not a fan of Democrats either. I want a transformation of politics in general, including in the Democratic Party. But part of the reason that Donald Trump was able to get to this point where he has pushed American politics this far is because he convinced people that his style of politics, his style of insanity, is no more insane than what you get from Democrats. That is just flat out wrong. Even if you don't like Kamala Harris, you don't like a single thing about her policy-wise, you thought she would have been bad at the job, still, there's a base level of competence that comes in the Democratic Party selection process. And I do think that it was done major damage to by Biden and the fact that he decided to run again and that nobody stopped him from doing that. So it's true that these things created a spectacle that made it hard for people to say, well, obviously Democrats are still worth voting for over Donald Trump. Except now, if Dave Smith is one of the few who's willing to tepidly admit that maybe Kamala Harris would have been better than this, it's also true that it was foolish to ever tell people that Democrats are so bad that it makes voting for Donald Trump normal. And because people like Dave Smith and Joe Rogan told them that voting for Donald Trump was normal, we now have a bunch of shit going on that's fucking insane. And the crazy thing is, this already happened. This happened before. And even if you want to point at COVID and say, look at all these crazy things that happened under Democrats, COVID got as bad as it was under Trump. Because Trump is a terrible president. He's very bad at this job. And ultimately, any commentator in politics should be able to very clearly identify that and say, this is a unstable and not worthy of public leadership type of person. We've had this already. We've been there. We've done that. Just let the prosecutors get him. Let him get eaten alive by his own statements of perjury. And let's move on. But instead, people like Dave Smith decided to sell to the center that Democrats are insane enough on the whole that it justifies a figure like Trump. That is the mythology of Trump. That's what gets us to that point of voting for him. So if you're changing your mind about voting for him now, that's fine. I'm glad. I'm happy for you. But it's hard for me to feel like anything has really changed if you are not willing to examine that mythology a little bit that led you to voting for Donald Trump in the first place, to thinking that there's any universe where Donald Trump would be a normal governing operator and make decisions that make sense on any level. We've already been through this, and if you're a serious person who's been an adult for a while, then you should be able to look at Donald Trump and say, maybe anything genuinely is better than that. Maybe Joe Biden literally dying in office is still better than this. So that being said, I do want to address this point about people who voted for Biden lecturing people over voting for Trump. And, you know, you voted for Biden and he ended up committing a genocide and nobody ended up turning around and saying, how dare you vote for Biden? And also talking about this thing about the evaporation of the anti-war left, which is weird because there's no anti-war right. You're seeing it a little bit now. And that's really Dave Smith's project right now, is trying to carve out the anti-war right within the Trump coalition. And that's good. I'm glad he's doing that. My thing is, the reason I'm not that enthusiastic about it, I don't think it's going to lead to that great of an outcome. I don't think that there being an anti-right flank is really that useful in anything other than stopping war, maybe. But I also don't think that it's that powerful of a coalition on the right, and I think that's a problem for Dave Smith to solve, not leftists, because I don't think they have as much power in this coalition as they think they have. But regardless, this idea of, oh, well, you voted for Biden, and I think there's some truth to that. I think the flaw in that is that the voting base in 2024 was a lot different than the one in 2020. And every election cycle, it changes a lot. And I think when you're talking about specifically the anti-Biden and pro-Gaza movement, a lot of that was fueled by young people. A big wave of that was fueled by people that were not old enough to vote in 2020 and came of age to vote in 2024. And so I think that that is a big portion of what you saw, and also might have affected some of those Gen Zers moving to the right as well, growing up during COVID, and not having the same type of political context that people of the millennial generation or on the sort of edge of the Zoomer generation might have. And so that means that people like me, who I wasn't a commentator at the time that Joe Biden was getting elected, but I was active in politics, I was talking about it, I was thinking about it, and I voted for Joe Biden. But again, this was in the midst of a crisis that was partially created or exacerbated by Donald Trump. And only through an elaborate judo move have they made COVID into something that is owned by the Democrats, given that we never talk about the fact that Trump absolutely exacerbated and made that crisis way worse. And 100%, if that crisis had hit while a Democrat was the president of America, it would have gone a lot smoother. A lot of people still would have died. There would have been issues for sure, but just the governance would have been smoother. And so the fact that we're still talking to people who just won't admit that, right? You can still admit you don't like Democrats, you don't like their policies, you don't like the social stuff, you don't like socialism, blah, blah, blah. But you can admit that at least there's a sense of governance and things don't start falling apart at the seams, and you don't have somebody like Trump who is threatening to use the full force of the military and U.S. government pretty much at any target that he deems fit. On any day. Like, that's nuts. And he did that during COVID. It was all the time, going on TV and just saying the craziest shit that he could think of. And so now people like Dave Smith have warped that into a narrative to say Democrats dropped the ball so bad, once again, because of the crisis that Republicans created and are going to create again. Whoever the Democrat that inevitably takes power from Trump, even if they have to wrestle it away from him, they're going to be inheriting a fucking mess. This is going to get so much worse. So much worse is my message to Dave Smith, that this isn't even the beginning of it. And the reason is because these policies were always bad. It's not just that it was a scam, even though it was a scam, but even the policies that Trump promised that he is delivering on are bad, terrible policies. And it's the underlying worldview that, in some sense, governance is the problem. The idea that there is competent government is the problem in society, rather than that there are profit-seeking exploiters who have more power than the government in many instances. That is your bias that led you to voting for Donald Trump. And until you let go of that a little bit and start to think in terms of how we can give more power back to people democratically and create a society where people have more leverage, because right now people have no leverage. Working people have absolutely zero leverage. And in order to create a society where working people have more leverage, it's going to take regulation. It's going to take unions. It's going to take government arbitration of disputes between employers and landlords and tenants. It's going to take governance. So this libertarian approach is a non-starter. So, like, yes, it's great that you're anti-war, and I do think that there should be anti-war coalitions to the end of stopping this war. But at that point, what else do we agree on? Do we even agree on what the means of stopping this war should look like and how America should govern itself on the world stage? Because being willing to ever vote for Donald Trump in the first place is an indication that you don't. So, I'll end this by saying I don't think it's inherently bad to pick up the same message as people on the right who are speaking against the war, trying to harmonize there to create maximum pressure against it. I think that's a good thing. But expecting me to not be skeptical of your worldview when your worldview is the one that brought us Donald Trump, and my leftist worldview is not the one that brought us Joe Biden. It's not. leftists wanted something other than Joe Biden. We wanted something other than Kamala Harris. So many leftists might have voted for them or said this is a better option than Donald Trump. And guess what? Even you admit at this point that they were right. So there's a fundamental imbalance in your way of looking at the politics of this situation, and expecting me to ignore that because you're right about Trump now on something that's very obvious is a little childish. So, good for you, but don't expect me to give you credit beyond that if you're not even willing to take your analysis 2 steps further.